Hello and welcome to our Ucits webinar series. My name is Julien Ganter and I'm very pleased to be in front of you today to launch this first session of a series where we will share with you the expertise acquired by more than 100 of our Arendt Ucits specialists on various fields such as legal, tax and regulatory. First, some technical points that we would like to share with you. Before we start, if you have any questions to our panelists, please access the Q&A section that you have and that you will find in the toolbar. And should you have any or experience any technical issues, please feel free to go through the chat sections and ask for support and help on the toolbar too. Let's go back to the business that we have to discuss and the business topics that we have to discuss today. And today with me, I have the great pleasure to have two of our top experts on the PRIIPs KID, which are first Corinne. Hello, Corinne.
Hey.
So Corinne is a legal partner at Arendt, specializing on the Ucits KID and PRIIPs KID. She has been working on that for many years, and she's especially in charge of all the legal and the narrative parts of the PRIIPs KID topics. Alexandre. Hello, Alexandre.
Hi, Julian.
Nice to meet you. So next steps will be also, so Alexandre is manager at Arendt. He's part of our regulatory and consulting team, and he's in charge of all the risk practice. So no, without further ado, let's try to talk also about PRIIPs KID. As everybody knows, PRIIPs KID will come into force on the 1st of January 2023. And after the deadline had been postponed several times, I think this time we are more or less sure that it's going to be the 1st of January 2023. It will impact, of course, Ucits vehicles that we know, but also AAFs distributed to retail investors. And the industry is right now on the middle of the preparation phase because there are 7 months left before the start. We know that for that, they need to be able to prepare also not only from a regulatory standpoint, but also from an operational and technical point of view. And the idea today is to share with you the fact that there are some insights and pragmatic hints that we can share and discuss that could help you in the next months to come to get as well prepared as possible. So let's start with maybe the first question for you, Corinne. So Corinne, let's start with maybe setting up the scene. What are the main differences between Ucits and PRIIPs KID?
As you can see on that first slide, the content between the Ucits KID and the PRIIPs KID is indeed different. That already starts with the length, because you must know that a Ucits KID has 2 pages of content, except it's a structured Ucits, then it can have 3 pages. And the PRIIPs KID has always 3 pages on A4 format in printed out form. Basically, a few bits and pieces of the Ucits KID regulation have been transposed into the new PRIIPs RTS and are a copy-paste of some of the articles of the Ucits KID regulation, which means that you can reuse and recycle some of the parts of the Ucits KID, such as the objectives, the benchmark disclosure, the ESG objective, the features of the conversion, of the redemption, the name of the depository bank, where you can find further information if sub-ones are segregated and all that kind of thing. Basically, the concepts between Ucits KID and the PRIIPs KID differ from each other in the sense that the PRIIPs regulation introduces a concept which is called the PRIIPs manufacturer. So the PRIIPs manufacturer is any entity that manufactures PRIIPs, and that can be the Ucits management company, but it's not necessarily the case. So that can also be, for example, the fund manager, it can be the sponsor, the initiator, it can also be the fund board. So the main point attached to that PRIIP manufacturer is the responsibility in order to draw up the document and also to publish it on a website. At the same time, of course, this PRIIP manufacturer incurs responsibility for the content of that particular document and is, of course, also liable to the investors. Now, when looking at the differences between the PRIIPs KID and the Ucits KID in more detail, there are some sections in the PRIIPs KID which have not been included in the Ucits KID. These are, for example, the complaints, the wording in relation to the recommended holding period, and also the question of the inability to pay out. So these are 3 new sections included in the PRIIPs KID, which have not been included in the Ucits KID, and for which therefore a new wording will have to be drafted. Also, the PRIIPs KID, and Alexandre will speak about that, has no more past performance, but that's now a separate document. And also the previous performance calculations have to be made available to the retail investor. Now, coming back to that concept of the PRIIPs manufacturer, attached thereto is also the requirement to disclose the competent supervisory authority of the PRIIPs manufacturer, meaning that it will be that national competent authority of the member state where the PRIIPs manufacturer is established. So let's take an example. If we have a Luxembourg established PRIIPs manufacturer, then the competent authority for the purposes of PRIIPs would be the CSSF. In German, it would be BaFin. In Ireland, it would be the CBI, and so on and so forth.
Okay, so now we are going to focus more on the metrics you have to disclose in the PRIIPs KID. So basically, under the Ucits KID framework, you have to produce a set of 3 main figures, namely the synthetic risk and reward indicator, the charge of the fund, and the chart of the past performance of the fund. When you are going to shift to the production of PRIIPs KID, you will have to produce a set of 4 metrics related to the PRIIPs on the underlying fund. The first one is the summary risk indicators. In appearance, it looks like the SRI as you have to disclose in a Ucits KID, but basically this indicator is totally different because it is based on 2 different measures. The first one is a market risk measure, and the second one is a credit risk measure. The market risk measure is in fact similar to the SRI for Ucits KID. In fact, you are going to assess the volatility of your fund. Even if it's similar, it's really different because the formula is not the same. And as you may be aware, when computing the volatility of the fund for disclosure in Ucits KID, you have different buckets based on which you are going to assign single risk reward indicators. And the bucket under the PRIIPs KID regulation is quite different. So it will be for sure the case for a large number of funds that when computing the market risk measure for the first time as per the PRIIPs KID regulation, you will have a change at this level. On top of that, you also have to add the credit risk measure, which in fact is the assessment of the credit exposure of the PRIIP. For most of the Ucits, the credit risk measure should be equal to the same figures, but in some circumstances, it may be possible that it won't be the case, and the proper assessment will have to be made.
Okay, and well, what's in terms of benchmarking, and how do you plan to compute that, or what is expected from?
Yeah, in case you have a new PRIIPs or a PRIIPs with no sufficient historical data, of course you have to use a benchmark, as it was already the case under the Ucits KID framework. But it will be important in the second set of figures you have to produce, which are the performance scenario. Definitely here they are totally new, and basically the idea behind is just you have to produce some performance scenario which should reflect the behavior of the product under different market conditions. So you have to produce a scenario for favorable, unfavorable, moderate, and stress scenarios. Those ones are the based when available on the historical data of the PRIIPs. However, as we mentioned, if you are launching a new PRIIPs, for example, you need to use a benchmark. But here, practitioners have to pay really attention because in terms of data, you may require extensive data because under Ucits KID framework, you are, let's say, limited to 5-year history. But under the PRIIPs KID framework, for performance scenario computation, you will have to use at least 10 years of data.
And I suppose that's going to be one of the main challenges because 10 years of data is quite a huge volume of information that you need to gather. Huh?
Yeah, definitely. Because even if now you are using a benchmark for the production of the Ucits KID, it may require that you will need extra data if you don't have enough data for covering the 10 years. So it may imply an additional cost. For example, so PRIIP manufacturer, if you have to request data to an index provider. On top of that, in a few cases, you may also face the situation where your benchmark is not existing. So basically, you will have to define, let's say, another benchmark to cover the missing data point you may have.
Okay, coming back to the point that you mentioned before, the new product. So when starting really from a new set and launching a new product, the benchmark will be selected how? With a peer or?
Let's say for a totally new product, you have to select a proxy or benchmark.
Yeah.
Of course, you can use a peer, or you are also allowed, as per the regulation, to define a proper benchmark. What is new in the RTS is that you allow a clear set of criteria that you have to meet when you are going to define your benchmark you are going to use. And on top of that, the regulation is clearly stating that you have to properly document the selection process of the benchmark, meaning that we are expecting that PRIIPs manufacturers are going to establish a strong procedure with regard to this benchmark.
So sorry to interrupt you, but if I understand well, from a manufacturing point of view, you have the right to select, but you need to justify how you did it,
yes,
right?
Exactly, and you have some clear criteria that you have to respect when selecting a benchmark. So, for example, you have to take into consideration the geographical exposure of your benchmark and to compare it with your PRIIP, as well for the sector exposure. On top of that, it has to be comparable in terms of asset, of course. You have to compare an equity fund with an equity benchmark.
Makes sense.
And in addition, what is also important to note is that you have to keep a consistency between, let's say, the SRI of your product and the SRI of your benchmark. Because basically, you have two different time horizons when computing the SRI and when computing the performance scenario. So you may have enough data to compute the SRI, not enough for the performance scenario, but already you can check at this level. So by comparing the SRI on the SRI as the benchmark and the SRI as a PRIIP.
Okay, hopefully we need not lose anybody on that, but I think it's important to get into details because, as usual, devil is into these details on the PRIIPs KID production. Huh? So quite interesting. So then I will maybe go for Corinne to the next slide, more on the regulatory expectations, especially from a legal point of view on the narratives. So what is new on that?
Exactly. So what's new is that the ESAs, the European Supervisory Authorities, they have issued a statement as of the 9th of May this year. So that's indeed quite new. That was just the beginning of the month. And it's addressed to national competent supervisory authorities. And it's basically setting out their expectations, what they want to see for the first section of the KID, which is called What is this product?
Okay.
So now you should know that what is this product is basically categorized into 4 different items. It's type, where you basically describe what is the type of the PRIIP, like it's a Ucits with sub-fund and share classes, for example. Then the objectives, meaning what is the investment objective and sort of the objective of the PRIIP, sort of how is the performance achieved and that kind of thing. Then you need to describe the term. Is there a term? Is there no term? How can the product be terminated? And then last but not least, the intended retail investor, in a sense that you have to describe in accordance with the MiFID II target market considerations to whom you want to actually sell this product.
Okay, and at the end of the day, between the prospectus and the narratives per se that you are putting into the PRIIPs KID, what are the differences? Is it similar, or what do we need to change? How do we need to make sure that they are at least at par on both levels? How do you manage that, and what is really at the end of the day the difficulty of it?
I should say that sort of to simply copy paste the prospectus into the PRIIPs KID is maybe not a sufficient exercise, as there is an expectation that on the one hand it's really transparent and understandable for the investor, that you should avoid jargon, too technical terms, and that the document also has to be drafted in plain language. Meaning that, for example, now if grandma wants to buy sort of Ucits and has several kids in front of her to check what is maybe the most suitable for her, then it should be possible from also an investor transparency point of view that the retail investor can actually understand what the product does, how the return is achieved, and what in fact happens in that product.
Okay, so we need to make sure that a retail client can clearly understand what he or she is buying, and at the same time not be too technical. So there is a clarity that we need, a clarity level that we need to reach, making sure that we are aligned with the prospectus. Otherwise, I suppose there will be some sanctions too. Huh? So because there's always a risk of a misalignment between both, and that leads to misinterpretation also from the investor at the end of the day.
Indeed, the PRIIPs Level 1 regulation contains an article where it is said that, of course, civil liability can be incurred in case that the disclosure in the KID is, for example, is inaccurate, is misleading,
or is also inconsistent with the prospectus, for example. So if you have a PRIIPs KID saying, oh, it's an equity fund sort of buying European equities, and if you look into the prospectus and you discover it's actually a fund of fund, then of course this doesn't work, but it's sort of towards this initiative to really make meaningful investor disclosure and also to help those retail investors understand what they actually invest into. So basically to say that the concerns of the supervisory authorities were really in a sense that sort of the disclosure should not be abstract, technical and not understandable, but really making this move to having a more meaningful investor disclosure and also to provide them valuable information based on which they can make their decision.
So you would say that from a legal standpoint, producing a PRIIPs KID is maybe more, well, it's more important to take the legal approach than it used to be on the Ucits KID, or it's the same kind of level?
Well, I should say that the Ucits KID regulation was already stating that documents have to be drafted in plain language. And since sort of the PRIIPs RTS encompass a portion of the Ucits KID regulation, so that you can take at least bits and pieces of the Ucits KID, that would be perfectly fine. But I think what the ESAs were also getting at, and that's a point that they've mentioned, if you go into the automatization of the procedure, then of course it may happen that sort of there is a predefined text box which automatically appears in a certain scenario.
Yeah.
And that's maybe what should be avoided. So to not simply state this product is a fund, but maybe to say it's a Ucits fund with multiple compartments and you are buying a share class, it's a Euro share class, so that really there's a bit more flesh to the bones, I should say, than sort of rather to make very generic and high-level statements and really to enable the investors to properly sort of be aware of what they are actually buying.
Okay, so you would say that it's avoiding copy-paste, but clearly trying to put more explanation into the PRIIPs KID so as to support the decision process on the retail investor. Okay.
Indeed, that's what I would say. And especially sort of since this supervisory statement is addressed to the competent authorities in the member states, sort of I'm pretty sure that there will also be sort of more focus on really to make this investor disclosure, of course, compliant, but also to ensure that it's really understandable and valuable.
Okay, so there might be a little bit more focus on that than what we are used to seeing on the Ucits KID.
That's possible.
Okay, that's a possibility. Okay, well, thanks, Corinne. So then, Alex, maybe I will come to the next point. I understood that there will be also changes on the way liquid assets are tackled. What is changing?
Well, basically, we are going to leave a bit the Ucits world to focus, let's say, our liquid fund investing in liquid assets. Because I would just discuss, in fact, the ultimate goal of PRIIPs KID is to give accurate and meaningful information to retail investors.
Yeah.
In that sense, it's possible for some funds, mainly alternative funds, investing in liquid assets, may have to produce PRIIPs KID for the retail investors. Basically, as per the regulations, illiquid funds are defined, a special subcategory of liquid fund. Illiquid funds are defined as the fund having NAV frequency on the less than monthly, so basically quarterly fund, semi-annual or annual fund, they will be considered as a liquid one. As per the regulation, you still have to produce, let's say, the same set of metrics as for liquid fund. In that sense, however, you have less guidelines, at least for the performance scenario. For the summary risk indicator, it's quite easy because it's more or less fixed due to the fact that the market risk measure itself is fixed as per the regulation. However, the regulation is saying that for performance scenario, you have to be able to provide reasonable and conservative based estimates of the performance scenario.
But that means, so sorry to interrupt you, Alex, on that, but that means that there will be a lot of room for interpretation on the scenario side.
Yeah, we can see that there's a lot of room for interpretation, and let's say the flexibility, yes, for the PRIIP manufacturer.
Okay.
But however, what we noticed, based on the support and the advices we are giving to our client, is that they have the flexibility, but as they know that they have to produce accurate figures which are going to really represent what and how the product should perform in the future, they really pay attention and they are really looking for some advices on how to be able to produce such figure. So what we see, some of PRIIP manufacturers are going to work by using a benchmark. Some others are going to work on the, let's say, cash flow projection with some modelization in order to better estimate those figures.
So on that, for the moment, on the clients you are seeing and the discussion that we have on the markets today, what will be maybe the main trends? benchmarks?
Let's say the use of benchmark will be the easiest one and the most convenient, and especially if you compare to the liquid fund, for which you have a clear guidelines for benchmark selection. If you keep the spirit of the regulation, it will be the easiest way. However, you have to pay attention that when using benchmark, and especially for a liquid fund, you also have to take into consideration the different costs related to your fund in comparison to the one potentially at the level of your benchmark.
But would creating maybe your own model be easier to explain or to justify at the end of the day for the regulator, or would it make more sense also from a performance scenario point of view? What do you think?
Point of view, there is no obligation because as we just discussed, you have the flexibility. But I think from a product manufacturer point of view, if you define a strong and robust methodology or model to assess those performance scenarios, it may be more reliable and accurate, because if you are launching different PRIIPs with a similar strategy, at least you will be able to produce similar kind of figures, and it won't be misleading at the end for the retail investors.
So you would say that it might be more reliable at the end of the day?
Yes, definitely. But the most important is also the way you can justify those figures.
Okay, but it's most also, I suppose, from an operational standpoint also, or from a workforce point of view, it's more intensive. So you need more to put more meat and more work into it when you go through.
It's not just you take the formula from the regulation and you apply them here. You have really to think about your product and the expected return of your product.
Okay, interesting. So you would say that this is one of the main challenges on the liquid side at the moment, no?
Yes, definitely, yes.
Okay, interesting. So, well, going back maybe to the risk measured part still. Today, when we compare that to the Ucits KID, from a workload point of view, you would say that it's far more important than what we were expecting, or what are we seeing today from a pragmatic point of view? People are being ready and so on. But compared to the Ucits, is it far more intensive from a workload point of view than what it used to be?
I think the main challenge is now, and you have a huge workload now, because you have to adjust all your process you have in place. So, for example, you have to implement the new methodology for computing the market risk measure, for computing the performance scenario. So it may be challenging either at the PRIIP manufacturer level, they are producing themselves the Ucits KID for the moment and they want to shift to PRIIPs KID, or even at the level of the service provider. We are seeing that a lot of service providers are only starting now to implement the new RTS, because as we mentioned at the beginning of the webinar, as they have been postponed several times, and now the effective date is the beginning of next year. On top of that, one big challenge for the market practitioner will be clearly the use of the extensive data. So it means that now you have to work on how to get the data, to be sure that data are available. And as we mentioned it earlier, if some data are not available, you have to find another way to be able to produce the metrics of the PRIIPs KID. Okay,
so one challenge compared to the Ucits KID clearly is the fact that from a data provider point of view, we need to get more information, more reliable information, and something that, well, will be also useful going from 5 to 10 years, making sure that you have the right database to be able to store the data.
Yes, exactly. On top of that, if you focus on the cost you have to disclose in the PRIIPs KID, now you have the introduction of the implicit transaction cost. And for this one, you have to rely on specific data, which so far were not collected for by PRIIP manufacturer. So basically, you need to use the hourly price in your computations. And this has to be implemented starting 2025, for which you will need to have at least 3 years history. So this means that already since the beginning of this year, normally the PRIIP manufacturer should be able to collect this hourly price to be used for future computations.
And what do we see on the market? People getting ready on that?
Most of the clients are trying to get ready as much as possible, because it's not really easy to get those information, because before they were never used. So most of the time there's a work to be performed with the portfolio management system in order to be sure to retrieve the information at this level.
Okay, so it's a new kind of data that we need to make sure that you are reaching, getting, and storing somewhere. Yes, which was not the case before.
Yes, it was not the case before. So this is totally a new process to be implemented at the level of the PRIIP manufacturer.
Okay, so that's clearly one of the challenges that we are seeing at the moment on the market.
Yeah.
Okay, interesting. So, Corinne, I think coming back on the fact that it's going to be January 2023, we know that we have Ucits, we know that we have PRIIPs, we know that we might have both. Let's say, we just fast forward and we go to 1st of Jan 2023. I'm a manufacturer. What is changing for me? What do I do? What do I need to do? Ucits, PRIIPs, Ucits, only PRIIPs?
The answer to that is first and foremost easy, and then will become more complicated.
Okay.
Let me explain why. Starting 1st of January is really the kickoff of the Ucits for the PRIIPs KID, meaning that every Ucits being sold to retail investors in the European Union really does need a PRIIPs KID.
Okay.
But there's a difference, again, between the PRIIPs regulation and the Ucits KID regulation.
Mm-hmm.
Because the Ucits KID regulation is looking at the product and basically saying, look, if you have a Ucits, then you need a Ucits KID if you want to sell it. The PRIIPs regulation, however, is saying, if you have a PRIIP and you want to sell it to a retail investor in the European Union, then you need to provide this investor with a PRIIPs KID. So meaning slight difference, sort of Ucits KID really only looking at Ucits, check, Ucits KID required. And sort of the PRIIPs regulation more looks at the investor as such, because as we were saying earlier, it's really the focus on the retail investor, and sort of the retail investor is sort of the target of that regulation.
Okay, and what if I'm a professional investor?
Yeah, that's a good point. So if you're a professional investor, then you have two options. Either you provide that professional investor also with a PRIIPs KID, that is totally possible based on existing rules, or you could make a choice and provide that professional investor with a Ucits KID. That seems now to be bizarre in terms of a statement to be made, but because of this distinction being made between the retail investors and the professional investors, that's sort of the natural legal result coming out of it. Mm-hmm. But of course, imagine that you are now the PRIIPs manufacturer. Of course, you would be, from an efficiency point of view, maybe more inclined to have just one single document produced and to provide this document to both your investors, instead of still continuing in the Ucits KID and to provide this Ucits KID.
That's right, because from an operational point of view, having to maintain two operating models to be able to provide Ucits and PRIIPs KID is of course quite, I would say, quite painful. So if you can avoid, I suppose that most of the actors on the market will avoid, but why should we keep it then? Or why do we see people keeping both productions?
Well, the more complicated point comes now.
Okay.
As I was saying. In fact, if you look at distribution outside the European Union, there may be local rules requiring you to provide a Ucits KID.
Yes.
As an example, sort of we've heard recently that because of Brexit, the UK has delayed their PRIIPs implementation, and at least for the time being, it looks as if you want to distribute in the UK, then you would still need a Ucits KID to be provided to the UK investors. Because, as I said, of Brexit, it's no longer part of the Union, and sort of they have made a decision as to their own regime. So it may now be that depending on the country outside of the Union that you want to distribute in, that sort of local rules may still impose a Ucits KID, and others may say, look, you can also provide a PRIIPs KID, that's fine for me, but that will then be really based on local rules in terms of the marketing outside the Union. Okay,
then for a manufacturer, you would advise the manufacturer to go through the scope they are, for the moment, covering and making sure that on an exception-based approach, they try to identify where they would need the Ucits KID instead of a PRIIPs KID. And I suppose that we can expect maybe these countries to give some updates before even the 1st of January still, because there are still 7 months to go, so we might have some surprises on that. It's not finished yet, so...
Exactly, so there's still time. And I would assume that sort of people are still hoping that you can still use a PRIIPs KID as an equivalent, for example, in the UK. But indeed, it's important to look at your distribution countries.
Okay.
Like we've had the case with one of our Ucits clients a few weeks ago, who was also asking us that question, sort of to check with local counsel, for which countries, in fact, a PRIIPs KID would be accepted because they have implemented a similar regime, and in which countries you would still need a Ucits KID. So that's really an exercise, I believe, from a legal standpoint would really make sense, just to make sure that from a distribution perspective, you can still be compliant with the local rules that are implemented in that particular country.
Okay, those questions are coming now, because I suppose that they are trying to understand where they will have to distribute what kind of products, or documents, sorry, and that's quite important, okay.
Exactly, that's important.
Okay, so we need to prepare for and plan for the worst, meaning having the possibility and the capacity to provide both documents, but expect that we will have some updates from these countries in the coming months or weeks on the fact that they will align with the PRIIPs KID production, which could make sense then. Okay. Yeah.
Indeed, and what I should also be saying, the ESAs have also announced that sort of similar to the statement that they've already made on the supervisory statement on the what is this product section, that sort of further guidance may be expected, also maybe in respect of other sections. So that's, I think, important still this year to stay tuned and to be updated in terms of really understanding what the expectations are, and then also seeing to adapt processes and procedures from all points of view in order to match them.
Okay. So given the fact that I would go back to another point that we mentioned before, the RTS. So a couple of weeks ago, we had again an update. Do we expect from a regulatory standpoint to still have some, so not speaking about the updates which are linked to the Ucits and PRIIPs KID, but any kind of other RTS or other updates from the regulator in the coming 7 months that could change or impact the way we are starting to set up the processes for producing the PRIIPs KID? What is your point of view on that? What do you see coming? Do you expect again still changes coming in before summer or just after summer? Or maybe fine-tunings, whatever?
Well, personally, in my opinion, we may expect some few guidelines given by the authority, especially on some specific points related to the matrix computation. Even it's, for most of the computation you have to perform are clearly stated in the RTS and in the new RTS as well. You still have some few points of the regulation on which a lot of market practitioners are thinking about it and are not sure on how to implement this. And we do believe that within the coming months we may have some clarity on this point given the guidelines issued.
Okay, so if I understand you well, Alex, it's going to be maybe fine-tuning, some very clear clarifications on some very specific points.
Yes. But at the end that the overall process will have to be changed, for sure.
Okay.
Not.
That's good news for everybody.
But it's there. Let's call it a fine-tuning at the end.
Okay, so meaning that might be very clear statements or clarification on some of the processes explaining how to manage maybe the performance scenarios or any other kind of topics that would be okay. Okay, and for the narrative side, maybe Corinne, do you think there might be some updates on that, or we are more or less fine and we should be fine for starting working on the first draft of the PRIIPs KID?
Well, we now already have some guidance sort of just issued this month where we can really have a clear view on what the expectation is and then adapt accordingly.
Yeah.
The document you were referring to was this corrigendum that has been published earlier. And that was basically to adjust sort of some formatting and also to replace some appendices with a new layout. But there were, of course, at that step in the process, no real substantial changes to the PRIIPs framework so far. Although I should be saying that, of course, the PRIIPs framework in overall is currently being under review and discussions are ongoing, and so to be seen what the future brings. But I would expect that that's not something to be implemented really, as Alexandre was saying, for now in the PRIIPs RTS, but that's sort of a broader review taking place at the European level, sort of which we have to see as we go.
Okay. So as a conclusion, I would say today, when we see where it stands, so, well, at Arendt, we have a very nice positioning, I would say. We have 40% of the market share on the Ucits in Luxembourg. We have, of course, the opportunity to work on the whole value chain today, thanks to the fact that we are working on the legal, the regulatory, and all the operational side. But based on that and the experience that we have and discussion that we have with our clients, what do you see as being the main challenges from a PRIIPs point of view?
I think I can maybe start and then Alex
as you wish
to join. I think the parallel sort of getting ready draws resources and sort of you need to have staff available, and of course there are costs involved, meaning you are still in the Ucits KID logic until the end of the year, but you need to get ready for the PRIIPs KID because you have to hand it over starting 1st of January. So there is at least a parallel phase where you still produce Ucits KID, but where you have to get ready for your PRIIPs KID and sort of already see how to design it, where you get your narratives from. So that's something I would say that industry players are struggling with because you need effectively staff to do it, and it's also a cost involved. And then on the other hand, sort of really to manage the volume, because if you consider that PRIIPs kits have to be prepared on a per share class basis, that is a lot of text that you need to produce.
No, you're right. So from a production point of view, the aggregation, the selection, the review, the quality review that needs to be done is, of course, a nice challenge on that.
Yeah.
And from
in addition, you can also add that you have to eventually to translate the script.
Yeah, you're right.
Yeah.
Translation is also a big topic. You're totally right. From a risk matrix perspective, what do you think, Alex?
From risk matrix perspective, so far the main challenge is to collect all the underlying data you may need for computing the metrics. And this, I think that's clearly the challenge that a lot of market practitioners are working on it for the moment. And yes, ultimately, the most important from an operation point of view is to clearly identify all the source of information, metrics, on underlying data, but as well for the narrative part, you have to identify which one I can maybe reuse, which one I have to add, because it was not for now in the Ucits kit. And when everything is really set up in terms of workflow, you have to aggregate everything. And this, I think that's a big challenge for the market practitioner, and especially once aggregated, as it has been said by Corinne, you will have a big work on the review of all the documents.
Okay, well, thank you. Then let's see a little bit what are the questions, because suppose we got some questions. Yes. Okay, I'll start maybe with the first one. So coming back to the UK, maybe there are again some clarification requested on the UK side. So from a UK perspective, coming back to what you mentioned, the UK, we expect them, well, we need to see, but for the moment we expect them to stay on the Ucits kit, right?
For now, sort of last time we heard is that it's the Ucits kit, but that may change sort of in the coming 7 months, where sort of the industry hopes that there will be a move towards the possible use of a PRIIPs kit, but that's indeed something which we need to see. And sort of I checked recently, but I've not found any updates on that yet.
Okay, so and then we have questions also on the benchmarking side. So today, so in terms of selection of benchmarks, do we see any best practices at the moment? So how are people selecting benchmarks on your side at the moment, Alex?
Well, for the moment, market practitioners are selecting benchmarks really by following the main criteria set as per the RTS. As I said briefly earlier in the webinar, you have really clear criteria that you can follow, and that's what we see for the moment in the market. And most important is you have to really work on the PRIIP, let's say fund, for which you don't have sufficient data, you will have to select a new benchmark. Here, that's a clearly main point. On top of that, you have to ensure that the benchmark you are using for the Ucits kit so far will still comply with the set of criteria defined in the RTS.
Okay, and coming back on the the liquid part, any specific topics on how to produce them? Because there is a question on how making sure that the example or the model that will be used will be agreed by the regulator. So do we need to take that into account? How do you make sure that the model that you will take can be also explained and justified to your regulator at the end?
Well, basically, as for the benchmark selection process, for me, from a manufacturer point of view, if you are going to use a specific methodology to assess the performance scenario, especially, it has to be fully documented, and you have to clearly document the assumption behind your model. And as stated in the regulation, the ultimate goal when doing this exercise for illiquid fund and illiquid assets is to be able to provide to retail investors a conservative and reasonable best estimate. At the end, it has to be in line with what we can expect by expecting the product.
What do you mean by conservative and reasonable? So at the end of the day, it's quite easy. So it's understandable, conservative, of course, and reasonable too. But how will the regulator check that, and how will you justify in front of the regulator the fact that it's conservative and reasonable?
I would say for new PRIIPs, the thing is that clearly you have to compare with the peer group on similar strategy for similar fund investing in similar class of assets. Clearly, the figures you are going to provide in your PRIIPs kit, they have to be in line with the strategy. Otherwise, it may raise some question, especially from the regulator, to maybe better understand.
Okay. And then maybe I will take a last question, maybe from a narrative perspective. Okay. So from a narrative perspective, why do we need the legal advice on that, and why is the legal part important on the creation of the narrative side?
I believe, especially because the PRIIPs regulation itself has a sanction regime,
Yeah.
sort of that it's really important to be compliant. Why is that? Where there are sort of really predefined layouts and in which order you have to follow them, what the predefined content of those sections has to be. And in fact, it's the PRIIPs manufacturer, again, responsible for ensuring that. But you must know that different from the Ucits KID regulation, the PRIIPs KID regulation has its own sanction regime. That
Okay.
means that sort of the competent authority would be in a position to either make an administrative measure like prohibit the marketing of the PRIIP or make a public warning or whatever, and they can also impose administrative fines up to a maximum amount of 5 million euro or 3% of the annual turnover. So that's a lot, and of course you want to make sure that the document is really complying with the legislation and regulation in force in order to avoid that sort of you can get a prohibition, a public warning or even a fine, because the PRIIPs KID regulation tells you quite clearly in which instances that is going to be applied, and of course that is if the disclosure of the information in the KID is not correct. So that's something to be really looked into, and that's really the difference between the Ucits KID and the PRIIPs KID.
And do we expect the fact that from a distribution point of view, we will of course disseminate information towards several authorities at the end of the day, or at least we'll have a look at it from several countries. So do we expect that to be also a challenge, or from a legal point of view, narratives being settled, I suppose, for Luxembourg for Luxembourgish fund, but at the end of the day, we are disseminating, notifying different countries. So we'll have the view from the authority on the CSSF side, I suppose, for Luxembourg. We don't expect anybody else to challenge it afterwards, in France, for instance, or in Italy or somewhere else, right?
Well, strictly speaking, there are no, and I say strictly speaking, there are no country-specific KIDs in the sense that the idea sort of is more to look at it from a holistic perspective.
Yep.
That indeed sort of the competent authority is the authority where the PRIIPs manufacturer is established. So meaning that I would assume that basically this authority is then looking at the relevant document and then making an assessment in line with the ESA's guidance if sort of that is now correct, not correct, if that's in compliance. But I would sort of rather expect, or that's the goal of the entire exercise, that we would have a more harmonized view on a European level, and that there's indeed no regulatory arbitrage in between the competent supervisory authorities in the various countries.
Okay.
That's at least how it should be.
Okay, so that will be important. Okay, perfect. Well, there are other questions, but what I suggest that we'll take that on our side and, of course, revert to the people who have other questions after the session. So we are right on time, so I will go to the conclusion. So, well, this is the end of the first session on our Ucits webinar. So first, I would like to thank you, my dear fellows, today. So thanks, Corinne. Thanks, Alex, for taking part. Well, thank you. A great pleasure to be with you today and to do the moderator and to play the role of asking questions. And I want to thank, of course, the audience for joining us for this first session of our webinar series on Ucits. We had a lot of questions, and again, we'll take care of that just after the call, at the end of the webinar, sorry. And you will also get the presentation and, of course, the replay of the session today, the webinar, via email just after the closure of the session. I'd like also to invite you to join us, to the next Ucits webinar series, a session that we will have, especially in June. So as you can see on the slides, we have one on eligible assets on the 8th of June, another one on cross-border distribution, and a last one on delegation and oversight just before summer break. For those who can take, will be happy enough and lucky enough to take summer break in July, given what we have to do on the PRIIPs KID. But thanks, and we were very glad to have you with us today. And again, do not hesitate to register to the next sessions. And if you have any questions on PRIIPs KID, we are here. You get our contact details also through the presentations today and through the websites. Please feel free to reach out to us for any questions. Thanks, and good luck, and have a very great day today.